Now that we've talked about scripts and outlines, in this section, we're going to talk about preparing for an interview because interview podcasts are one of the most popular formats out there. And even if you don't plan on doing an interview style podcast, if you podcast long enough, there's a very good chance at some point you're going to want or need to do an interview. And if you've never tried to do an interview before, especially without prep work, it can be incredibly difficult. The good news though is that I'm guessing you've listened to interviews before and you probably have an idea of things that you like in them and things that you don't like. It's really important to keep those preferences in mind as you're preparing for your own interviews in your own podcast. If there's something that somebody does when they interview people that annoys you, be sure that you don't do that thing in your podcast. It doesn't even mean that that thing is universally bad, but going all the way back to putting yourself in the seat of the listener, in a lot of cases, your listener and your audience is going to be somebody who identifies with you. So if something bothers you, there's a good chance it's going to bother them too. There are several steps to prepping for an interview, so let's start with just some research. Doing background research is going to depend on who you're interviewing. If it's somebody you know really well, you probably already have a built-in encyclopedia of knowledge of that person and you might not have to do much or any research on them. If you're going to be interviewing somebody who's very well known, then it'll be easier to find information about them just on the internet by searching articles, Google, all that kind of stuff, and you can probably hopefully find some good background information. But if you're interviewing somebody you don't know, who's not well known, then that's when it can be a little bit tricky to find good background information and to do a bit of research on them. You can always do some pre-interview questions if you want, things that might not even be in the actual podcast episode itself, just to kind of get to know the person, get an idea of where they're coming from, what you might want to talk about. I will say though, not everybody has time for that. They might agree to be on your show, but they might not have time beforehand to do a bunch of back and forth prep work. So definitely put the burden of prep on yourself and not on your guest. You don't want the person to feel obligated to be on your show. Sometimes though, this is a bit of warning, if somebody does do your pre-interview questions, if you decide to ask them questions beforehand and you send them some questions and they answer them out, they sometimes take that really seriously and they think that that's what we need to talk about. And so then when you actually get to the show and you're recording the episode, it is almost like they go back to those questions as being their script. And they almost want to go to exactly what they responded, read exactly what they wrote. And that can derail the feel of a natural conversation. And you really do, most of the time, want your interview to feel like it is just people having a conversation. There happens to be a microphone or a camera in the room with them. So in addition to doing a bit of research on the person you're interviewing to get to know more about them for yourself and before the interview, it's also a great idea to make sure that you contextualize them for your audience. So this can mean that before the interview segment starts, you record a separate introduction where you talk about who the person is, how you got to interview them. It sets the stage for the whole interview. You can do that in the interview itself as well if it kind of just works out that way. Sometimes people will do the interview and then afterwards they will record the intro segment so that way they can refer to specific things in their interview. They can say like, you're going to really love that we were able to talk about X, Y, and Z, and he had some great stories about this, that, and the other thing. And, that's probably a pretty effective way to contextualize them for your audience and even tease the interview so that they continue being interested as they're listening. Whatever is natural to you will be just fine. Again, that's kind of the running theme here. Just make sure your audience isn't listening to someone they have no idea while they're hearing that person talk. They don't know who they are. There's no reason for them to care about this person at all. Anybody can be interesting if they're contextualized properly. So prepping for your interview is very important, not just for you, but also for your guest. If you are interviewing someone who is more well-known, chances are they've already done other interviews. They've been on podcasts. They've had articles written about them. There's information and stories and all the things already out there. And you might find yourself debating on whether or not you actually want to listen to those interviews or watch that stuff because you might have the fear that you don't want to be influenced by what somebody else has already done. But at the same time, you don't want to just recreate the same interview over and over again. So if the person's already been interviewed, you don't want to just kind of ask them the same questions, get the same responses, and there's no real difference between what you're doing and what somebody else has already done. So what I recommend is that if you're going to be talking to someone who's been interviewed regularly, maybe listen a little bit or skim through some of their past interviews to get an idea of what they talked about, because you don't want them to just tell the same stories over and over again. And if this is somebody who has a following, like they're a pretty well-known person who has fans that kind of seek out interviews and things with them, those people have probably already heard all of those stories. And if you can bring out something new or shine a new perspective on that person, it's going to be really valuable for you and really valuable for the person you're interviewing. Super exciting for the people that follow that person, and you're going to bring something new and different that hasn't been done before. Now, when it comes to the nuts and bolts side of your interview, having your questions prepared is very, very important. When it comes to those questions, be sure that you are asking them in a way that encourages longer responses. Think of the who, what, where, when, why, how kind of prompts. Those are good things to include in your questions. You don't want to just ask yes or no questions. You can ask someone, hey, was winning that award really exciting? And then they'll say, yes. Cool. Congrats for you. That's not a very interesting interview. If you just throw in some of those prompts there, how did you feel when you won that award? What was going through your mind when you were doing the thing that led up to the award? All of that kind of stuff is going to naturally encourage the person to talk and open up a little bit more. With that in mind, it's also okay before your interview to just remind the person to avoid yes or no answers and just let them know, hey, we want to have a conversation, so when I ask you a question, feel free to tell a story, go off on a tangent if you think it's relevant, and do what you need to do to share the thing that you're most excited about in that moment. Now, there's a lot more to an interview than just sitting down with someone and asking them questions. There is a whole world of etiquette that I really encourage you to follow whenever you're interviewing somebody. I've seen and experienced some great examples of interview etiquette and also some really bad examples of interview etiquette, or lack thereof, said etiquette. And this all applies to whether you're doing an interview remotely or you're having somebody come to the same physical space as you. First off, never ever make it a chore for somebody to be on your show. Do your best to accommodate their schedule. Be sure that you respect their time. It's usually a good idea to have them arrive a little bit early, again, whether it's in person or virtual. But they probably don't need to be there 30 minutes or an hour early, and then they just sit around while you tinker with your setup to kind of dial everything in. Have somebody else help you with that part so the person can come in, sit down, and you can just get on with the show. You probably don't want to leave anything unanswered about how things are working, so make sure that you answer any questions that the person might have before they're on their show. It's a good idea beforehand to double confirm the date, the time, and the method or the location. Do you need to send them a Zoom link? Do you need to give them an address? Do you need to send them any prep information? Those kinds of reminders are really helpful, especially if you schedule the interview long in advance, like 3 months or something in advance, 24 hours or so before the interview. It's a good idea to sort of check in and remind them and let them know that you're really excited to talk to them on the show. If you're interviewing somebody in person, make sure that once they show up, you actually accommodate their human needs. Again, humans making human podcasts, right? Do they need to go to the restroom? Do they need a drink of water? Do they need a snack? Are they wearing a coat and it's hot in there and you need to put their coat somewhere? Like, all of those things that just let a human being be comfortable in an environment. Do all of that to be a hospitable host so that way your guest can get the most out of your show. If you're doing things remotely, the same way that you don't want someone to show up an hour early when they don't need to, you also don't want them to show up in 2 seconds and you're instantly recording before they even know what's happening. So make sure they can hear you, they can see you, make sure you can hear and see them. Make sure, again, they understand what's expected of them. Are you going to do an intro and bring them into the show? Is it going live? So there's going to be, a live chat and an audience watching. Do you need them to record something on their end? Do you need them to record their video, their audio? Are they capable of doing that? That's the kind of thing that you want to organize way in advance. You don't want someone to show up and say, hey, can you record this on your end? And they don't know how to record. You want to make sure if you need something from them that you work all that stuff out in advance. So now that you've done all of your due diligence, you've researched, you've drafted questions, you've made sure the person is super comfortable and you're ready to go, a lot of times when you're doing an interview, you do want it to feel like a natural conversation. So the thing that I would then advise you of is to not be just married to this list of questions and topics that you have for your interview. It's a great resource. It's something that could absolutely save your life in the interview. But if you ask someone a question like, hey, I heard you went on an overseas trip last year. What was that like? And then they tell you, oh my gosh, that trip overseas, it was amazing. First, I met the love of my life, but then we got kidnapped and abducted in the jungle and we were befriended by a gorilla who helped us escape these captives, and there was a pirate ship involved, and they basically tell you this entire crazy story, and then you say, okay, next question. I heard pizza is your favorite food. Why do you like pizza? if you ask somebody a question and they just deliver something so interesting and something that just makes sense to kind of keep following that thread, feel free to do that, even if it means you don't get to come back to your pre-planned question. It is okay to set your predetermined questions aside and just follow the natural conversation if that's what feels best in the moment. Sometimes the most unique, the most organic things, those are things you can never plan for. And that's oftentimes way better than what you could plan for. So it's okay to set your list aside for that if it really seems like it's going in a good direction. But those questions you took the time to make aren't useless. You do want to use them as a guide, even though they're not necessarily dictating the entire interview. If you're interviewing someone about a very specific subject and they keep going on tangents over here for things that really aren't related or things you really don't want to include in the show, then it's okay to tactfully bring them back to the questions you already had planned. Because at the end of the day, it is your podcast. They are a guest, but you're the one in charge. You know what you need to do to create the best episode for the show, for the listener. So becoming a good interviewer does just take a bit of practice, learning how to navigate some situations where things go off track. You need to get them back on track, learning how to bring the best out of people. Some interviews too are just going to go better than others. Sometimes you're going to have an instant connection with a guest where it feels like you could just talk for hours and hours. You need to do extended length episodes because it's so good. And other times it really is going to feel like you're struggling to pull anything out of somebody. For some people, as soon as a record button gets pressed or a microphone gets put in front of them, they kind of just clam up and they don't really know how to communicate because they haven't had all the skill and practice that you have through your podcast. So again, I can't overemphasize the running theme of these are skills that take time to develop, just like riding a bike or playing an instrument. It's going to feel weird and unnatural at first, and you might not be as good as you'd like to be, but with time and practice, you will become incredible. So now that we've rounded out a lot of the planning work for your podcast, before pressing that record button, let's head into the next lesson where I'll help you figure out how to set up a physical space to actually record your show.